Hello, music fans. I'm Brian Fox. This is another episode of I Hate Rock Music, and I'm really pumping them out now. I got a lot of catching up to do. I'm covering a lot of obscure bands that I really love. Eventually, I'll move in to other types of music. I'll be doing modern bands as well, and eventually, I'll be getting some hateful comments in my comment section because I'm definitely going to trash a few bands. But I'll save that for later. Right now, I'll be a nice boy and produce videos like this. And today's episode is about the band Highway Robbery. They released one album, I think, in 1972 on RCA Records, and it was interesting doing a little bit of research because for a lot of years there wasn't much information about the band out there, and I really love the record, and it's one of those rare occasions where, well, I shouldn't say rare occasion, but I actually heard them on the radio. Thought they sounded pretty good, and they used to get some airplay, and so I went out and bought the record, and I was pretty happy about it. And bands like Highway Robbery kind of take a beating sometimes because there's a new appreciation for some of these second and third tier bands, definitely mining the same territory laid out by bands like Led Zeppelin. So in that era, from 1969 to 1973, there was a lot of bands really kind of copying that sort of style, and that style really resonated with me. And even back then, bands like Dust and Sir Lord Baltimore and Head Over Heels and the like really had a lot of appeal to me. So anyway, so there's some good information. I didn't know this before. Mike Stevens, the guitar player, was actually in the Boston Tea Party, who had at least one record, probably a couple records out of Boston in the late 60s. And so he ended up moving to the West Coast. And he hooked up with some people that used to be in a band called Atlee. And Atlee had a single album issued on Dunhill called Flying Ahead. And the Atlee album, of course, has taken a lot of beatings too. In some respects, it's certainly not as exciting as other bands of that era. And but it has its moments. Mike Stevens' guitar playing is pretty good. Atlee is a okay singer. Material wasn't that spectacular, but still well worth hearing. I wouldn't necessarily recommend going out and buying it. I'm not sure if it's available on CD or not. And the record Atlee, is definitely a collectible. I think it fetches between $20 and $40. So if you're a vinyl freak, you can go out there and get that. And Don Francisco actually used to be in a band called Crowfoot as well. And Crowfoot had a couple albums out. I believe they were on Fantasy Records, and they're not too bad. They're kind of like Atlee, not spectacular. There's some strengths and a lot of weaknesses, and not necessarily something to go jump on out there. But once again, the Crowfoot albums probably fetch around $20 to $30 a pop. But so the band assembled a couple of members of Atlee, Don Francisco, and Mike Stevens, moved on to Highway Robbery, and they hooked up with the bass player, and they all moved to LA, and they were quickly signed to RCA. And the interesting thing is they didn't do a bunch of live shows, so RCA picked them up for whatever reason. I'm not sure. Their stuff was pretty impressive, but I was also surprised they practiced the album for a year and a half. So even though it came out in 1972, apparently they were already doing this material in 1970. Of course, if it came out in 1970, it would be that more impressive because with rock, a lot of times timing is everything. So they practiced the album for a year and a half. Apparently, they're all loaded on cocaine all the time, which is a plus. And same with Sir Lord Baltimore, of course. I remember interviewing John Garner of Sir Lord Baltimore, and he was always coked up all the time. And in fact, he bragged about the fact that he almost passed out a lot of times at their live shows because he was just so amped up. In fact, they have a song called Pumped Up that's about that experience. And so they also never played any shows before the album. They did a few handful of shows after the album was released, and all the tracks were recorded live, and so that's pretty impressive. And after practicing for a year and a half, it's no surprising that the performances on the record are really astonishingly tight and powerful. And you know, there's some weak moments on it, but I find the singing interesting and appealing. Vocal duties being split between a couple different members of the band. The guitar work is absolutely ferocious. I think the song they used to play on the radio is "Promotion Man," and it's just totally ripping. Kind of reminds me of what Rush might have been. So it kind of has that feel. So if you're a Rush fan, you might really dig this. But they didn't do very many shows. They broke up pretty quickly, and Don Francisco, the drummer, ended up playing with Linda Ronstadt. So when you hear Tracks of My Tears, you can think about Highway Robbery because Don Francisco is on that, and he played with Linda Ronstadt, and he actually is the harmony vocals on Linda Ronstadt's Tracks of My Tears. So anyway, some of these obscure records I'm not necessarily going to highly recommend. I'm just going to make note of them like I did earlier in this video. But the Highway Robbery album, For Love of Money, I definitely recommend. And it's got some pretty cool tunes on it. There's one called 15 that's just ferocious and is well worth the price of the record. Ain't Gonna Take No More is really good, and then Promotion Man, like I said, is the freaking mother load. So there you have it. Highway Robbery, For Love or Money. I highly recommend it, and boy, I'll tell you what, look at those clothes. I think those clothes and those hairdos and cocaine go together great. I'm Brian Fox. This is I Hate Rock Music.